Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Smiley Talks climate event run by Smiley Movement. Today, we're going to be talking to some fantastic guests about the climate and how we can help it to be able to thrive despite the many issues that it faces. We've got some incredible guests lined up, including Chown, James Kemp, Francesca Trotman, and Adriana Batty. And together, we will be discussing how exactly we can make the planet a better place to be. Smiley Movement, to give you a little bit of background, exists to help charities and nonprofits be the best that they can be by matchmaking them with organisations and people who would like to help. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce and bring to the chat our guests, and they're going to introduce a little bit about themselves, beginning with Henry, when I've added.
Hi, I hope you can hear me all right. And thanks very much, Ellen, for having me here today. It's really great to be here. So yeah, my name's Henry Chown, and I work for Friends of the Earth, which is a environmental charity that's been around for quite a long time. I think we're coming up to our 50th birthday as an organisation, although not mine personally yet. So Friends of the Earth is a large international network. We're active in 74 countries. We've got a separate organisation called Friends of the Earth Scotland in Scotland, and I work for Friends of the Earth that covers England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And we're really made up of local groups of volunteers on the ground. So in my area, we have about 300 groups of various sizes made up of volunteers campaigning on all kinds of different environmental issues, but with a major focus right now on climate change. What we're really trying to do right now is make sure that we get a green and fair recovery from this terrible pandemic crisis that we're going through at the moment. We know that what we had before, the economy and the society that we had before COVID-19 wasn't working for our planet or for many, many people, and that we have to build back something better than what we had before. When we come out of this crisis. So that's what we're all focusing on, and it's great to be here today to talk about what some of the solutions for that might be.
Excellent, thank you so much. So I'm going to ask Francesca, can you just introduce what it is that Love Our Oceans does?
Hi everybody, so my name is Francesca Trotman. I am the founder of an organisation called Love the Oceans. So we are a marine conservation organisation. We're based in Mozambique, and our mission is to establish a marine protected area here. So we do a lot of different areas of research and community outreach. We do fisheries research, we do humpback whales, coral reefs, ocean trash, marine megafauna, and we have 2 community outreach projects as well, environmental education and teaching swimming to reduce fear of the ocean and foster a passion for marine conservation. So I'm here today obviously talking about the oceans. When we're talking about climate change, the oceans are a central regulator in that, so we'll be talking about that. We operate in Mozambique, but our mission is to develop a conservation strategy that can be globally replicated, especially for poorer countries, less economically developed countries. So we take volunteers and they join us out here. Obviously things are a bit different with COVID, but that's us usually and in a nutshell.
Excellent. We'll talk a little bit more about how you've been adapting to the coronavirus crisis later. Adriana, would you like to explain what it is that Lyfcycle does and who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. So hi everyone, I'm Adriana. I'm one of the founders of Lyfcycle. Lyfcycle is a clothing sourcing and manufacturing company, but with a sole mission to do that sustainably. We're on a journey to co-create sustainably made products together with clothing brands and retailers, and to do so in a completely open and transparent way. Our mission is to share that with as many people as we can, be that other retailers and consumers. Essentially, the way that we've been buying and wearing our clothes until now isn't working for the planet. So we're taking our experience based on, our family experiences in clothing for the last few decades, and we're building on that with our passion for the environment to see what we can do to turn that around. So we are a small family-run business, but we've got big ambitions.
Yeah, you're taking on the big companies sort of one
Trying
at a
to.
time, aren't you? And trying to make the world better through sustainable fashion. Excellent. And James, would you be able to explain a little bit about what the International Tree Foundation does?
Sure, thanks you for inviting me. So I'm James, I work with the International Tree Foundation, and we've been around since 1922, so we're getting on for 100, and seem to have managed to avoid any sort of being in the public eye for about 98 of those years. What we do and have done since we were founded is community-led forest restoration. So that's working with the communities who rely upon or live in and around forest, and forest principally at the moment across 9 African countries and to some extent in the UK. And we work with them to develop a forest restoration or agroforestry, how trees can work in farms, or a tree planting project with them, so that the benefits of that project are met or meet the needs of the community, as well as the biodiversity and ecological and landscape resilience projects. We're a very small charity based in Oxford with a small office also in Nairobi, Kenya. And we're at the moment looking at our centenary in the future and plans to try to plant 20 million trees across Kenya to begin with by 2025.
So just a few trees then?
Just a few, but I mean,
Just
obviously it's the main point is the community-led aspect of it rather than the volume of trees.
Yes, definitely. I was interested that you're based in Oxfordshire, which is apparently one of the least populated areas by trees in the country, which was an interesting fact that I learned this week.
Yeah.
You're changing that though, right?
Well, we have a few small community-led projects, but these are small communities on small plots of land, and again, it's some of them are wanting to plant orchards, some of them small woodlands for communities to enjoy and to benefit from, to be around trees and to be outdoors. So it's not going to make a giant difference in the sense of scale, but it does make a big difference to people's lives.
For sure. Speaking of people's lives being changed, I guess the elephant in the room is the pandemic. This conversation was actually meant to happen many months ago, but pandemics meant that we couldn't all meet in real life, but also that I guess things have changed probably substantially in terms of how each of your organizations approaches the climate crisis, but moreover, there's potentially an opportunity for things to change. Life has changed so dramatically and in ways that people never could have expected. Henry, could you tell me a little bit more about this idea of a green recovery and what that means in terms of the coronavirus pandemic? Maybe explain a little bit about what that actually means for our listeners.
Sure. Well, thanks. It means we've already seen huge changes to the way our society is working. You know, all of us are probably sat in our homes instead of our offices, which we might have been in. Lots of people have been really badly affected, lots of job losses, and obviously worldwide we've just passed tragic milestone of 1 million people killed by this disease. So the world's not going to be the same afterwards. And we know that the world actually needs to change because of the climate crisis, this other terrible thing that's going on. So can we use this recovery? Can we to sort of try and fix or at least work towards fixing the climate crisis as we try and rebuild our economy and try and come back to something that's actually better than what we had before? So that's the principle behind what we're calling for is a green and fair recovery, something that helps certainly the environment and certainly the climate, but is also something that improves the lives of people in our country and worldwide. So, for example, we're looking for ways we can actually employ more people in sustainable green jobs, things that they're actually going to be able to carry on doing for years to come in an economy that is, you know, works for our planet and for people. That means, you know, if we've actually in this country got hundreds of thousands of people working in the fossil fuel industry, and that's one of the industries that suffered the most in the climate in the pandemic, because so much less driving, or so much fewer air miles are going on, that people are just using their product much less. We don't want to see all those people thrown on a scrap heap. We need to see them given retraining. You and actually put to work in fixing the climate crisis instead of making it worse, which unfortunately some of what we do right now does. It also means we've got to look at our global impact. One of the things what Friends of the Earth is fighting right now is actually the government, in spite of having spent all this money, on the pandemic, they're still looking to lend $1 billion to finance a gas plant in Mozambique, and this is just crazy stuff. We're Friends of the Earth has actually taken them to court. We've got a team of lawyers that we employ for this kind of stuff to speak for with our international partners in Friends of the Earth Mozambique, because this will be, as I think you'll probably hear from Francesca later, is a terribly damaging proposal for both wildlife, but also for people who are already being displaced to make room for this terrible project. And it's our money that's going towards that. Just think, we've got to somehow pull back from this crisis, but we're still actually spending our taxes subsidizing the fossil fuel industry to go and cause harm to our planet and our climate, when it could be funding a great scheme to insulate loads of houses and eliminate fuel poverty while employing people, or something. There's so much good we could be doing, and yet instead we're still going ahead and financing the fossil fuel industry with taxpayers' money. That's what we think a green economy looks like. We've got an action right now. We're asking people to write to their MPs, calling for them to push the Chancellor to make that happen. We're expecting Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, to come out with a statement fairly soon about what he thinks the plans are going to be, and we just need to make sure that they're good enough, that they really respond to the climate crisis, as well as doing all the things they need to do to come back from the COVID-19.
Yeah, I think certainly in terms of the pandemic, like COVID hasn't, just because COVID has happened doesn't mean that these other issues have gone away at all. And that's really a key sort of takeaway, I guess, from this, is that although one crisis arising doesn't mean that the other has been solved, and we can't get distracted, because there is ultimately a time pressure on these things, and especially with regards to the climate, we don't have much more time. It is a real emergency situation that needs to be tackled. And I think maybe perhaps some people feel like they don't know how they can get involved, or they're not certain that what they do makes a difference. But I guess what Friends of the Earth are showing is that there is ultimately a limitless potential. It's just about getting those with power and responsibility and authority and money to really commit to something, and to commit to making things more sustainable. You mentioned Mozambique, which leads very nicely onto Francesca. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about how the coronavirus crisis has impacted Mozambique and subsequently your work?
Yeah, so Mozambique started our lockdown in March, so closed borders and national state of emergency, which means all but essential work has to stop. So that's only changing literally tomorrow, the 1st of October. They're opening borders to travel within Africa, or at least that's my understanding of it. There's a lot of different news flying around. And so by shutting the borders, obviously that's changed a lot of the work that we do. We have a lot of people internationally that come and join us normally, which is now not possible. So it's basically affected 3 key areas of our work. First of all, our data collection. So the lockdown has meant that we can't go out on the boat. You're not allowed to launch dive boats and then go diving. And we dive for our coral reef research. So we haven't been able to do that, or go out and whale watch for our whale research. Any kind of like our marine boat-based research hasn't been possible. And we've also had our community work affected. Obviously, government regulations here have meant that we can't have large gatherings of people, and we would normally do educational workshops around environmental issues. So we talk about climate change, we also talk about like ocean trash, and we talk about turtles and why turtle poaching is bad, marine protected areas, why areas are so important, marine areas are so important to protect, things like that. But we haven't been able to do any of that on any kind of large scale at all. We've just began to have our community meetings again, but that's very selected, few select numbers of people, and all socially distanced and stuff. The other aspect, which I feel like everyone who runs a charity can relate to, is the funding cuts that come with a global pandemic. Obviously, a lot of like the healthcare charities had money thrown their way because of obviously it's COVID, but with environmental problems, as you said, actually, Ellen, we can't forget that everything else does carry on, and like the climate crisis is the biggest problem the human race has ever faced and probably will ever face. Yet the entire like news and media has just shifted to focusing on the pandemic for the last 8 months. And that means that there's not as much media being created around environmental issues. People don't care as much. And if people don't care as much and it's not as like a sexy subject, then there's less funding available, whether that be through corporate or through grants or anything like that. So funding cuts, and also from like an individual basis, obviously people's financial statuses have completely changed. A lot of people have lost jobs and don't know where the next paycheck is coming from. So not able to just donate money. Fundraisers aren't as successful as they would normally be. So there's like a whole range of impacts that COVID has. So at the moment, we've been focusing on trying to build our online presence, which can help us secure funders and things like that, and grant applications, trying to get some projects to the ground through applying for different grants that are available for what we do. So, and
I'm right in thinking also that the pandemic's impacted the sort of economy in Mozambique, and that's had an impact on like fishing and poaching respectively. Would you be able to explain a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, so there's no kind of, so in the UK, people have been really lucky in that there are government resources available, whether that be like mental health resources or backup financial resources. Most people have been able to pull through. Like, it has been really, really difficult, but there is some kind of like resource available for people. In Mozambique, that just isn't the case. So tourism is a really important source of income for Mozambique, and obviously with the shutting of the borders in March, and that's a really long time ago, that means that that revenue hasn't come in, and people have just literally been like cut loose, so they just don't have that source of income. And we're already working in I work in a very rural area with poverty levels are extremely high anyways. So you're adding a global pandemic and removing jobs that otherwise was keeping everyone going. So unfortunately, people have had to turn to illegal poaching and fishing as a way to feed their families, which is obviously bad for the environment, but you also completely understand why people have had to resort to it. So some of our work at the moment, we're launching a sustainable fishing project, which is around working with the fishing community and transitioning fishermen away from illegal poaching towards more sustainable methods. So kayak fishing, for instance, is a very sustainable method of fishing for the area, because you can go out to deeper reefs and you can target larger pelagic fish, like your barracuda and your mackerels and things like that, which are more sustainable. And that's all based off our coral reef and fisheries research, which we've collected over the last 6 years, and what we're observing on the coral reefs here and the change in fish presence and the balance between herbivores and carnivores. So like community conservation is so important. I feel like everyone knows that on this panel. Involving humans in the environmental solutions is so important, because humans are usually the cause of the environmental problem, so they've got to be involved in the solution.
And also, I guess something to really note there is that a lot of people or a lot of the things that happen that damage the planet are happening, as a consequence of something else. It's not an intentional decision that people are going out and trying to be destructive. People are just trying to live their lives and survive. And I guess that's the reality of the situation, is it's an evaluation of the way that people live. And some people obviously have more resources available to them to make a choice about what they do. But lots of people don't have that decision, and it's about working with different communities to find solutions in whatever situation there is. Adriana, I was going to see if we could chat a little bit about Lyfcycle and how you are dealing, or rather how you've been addressing the issue of fashion. Fashion has a notoriously fairly terrible reputation.
Yeah, sorry, you broke up a little bit there, but you're asking how.
Oh, it's all right. It's the
sorry,
joy
I
of
think
tech.
we've lost you a little bit on the sound.
Oh, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Sorry, so just yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah. So to recap,
Okay.
is this our position following the changes with COVID?
Yeah, and
that
how
you want to sort of understand a bit more about.
Yeah, and also how Lyfcycle deals with the issues within fashion and pollution.
Yeah, so I mean, a huge part of what we do within Lyfcycle is looking at the kind of pollution and more specifically the waste that is generated by the fashion industry. So fashion in itself is a huge contributor to global carbon emissions. It actually contributes around 10% of global emissions, which is more than air travel and sea travel combined, which I think for me, I know personally, when I first started researching all of this and really taking an interest, was something that massively shocked me. It really caught my attention, and I know that often when I'm speaking with other people, it's something that people don't really have an understanding of either. I mean, when you get on a plane or when you get in your car, there's a general understanding of the impact that can have on the environment in terms of carbon emissions and pollution. When you pick up a pair of jeans from your high street retailer, it's not something that you tend to think of. So a big part of what we do is informative, educational to some extent. It's connecting with some very large retailers and also some very small brands to make them aware of the impact that their operations are having on the environment and on pollution around the world. And then it's looking to see if we can collaboratively sort of reduce that.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess also, certainly something growing up, I was never particularly aware of, I was always aware of the role of cars. You're right, the role of cars and planes and kind of things that are obvious pollutants because you can literally see the exhausts coming out of them. Exactly. But in terms of the you can't see the ongoing impacts of
it's just
fashion industry, and especially also how many of the textiles particularly and how many textile fibers just get incinerated or chucked into landfill.
I touched on it briefly. Sorry, I touched on it briefly, but that's an element that we focus on a lot. So I kind of mentioned in my intro that we do everything with complete transparency, and an element of that kind of leads on to traceability, which is something that's really important to us with the products that we manufacture and the things that we make. So our whole process is designed to be as zero waste as possible, with a huge focus on the waste that's generated sort of at the production side of things overseas. That has been a big challenge for us, A, because nobody is tackling it yet, or nobody that we're aware of is looking at that, and B, because people over here in the UK, in Europe, whether it be a consumer, whether it be a brand, some of the biggest high street brands that we're aware of are not thinking about the waste that they're generating overseas. So it's a challenge to get people to think about it, to inform about the scale of that waste, but then it's also a challenge to get people to accept accountability, really, which is something that we are advocates of, because what we see is that in the UK, as a retailer, you are bound by regulations to make sure that you're recycling your packaging responsibly from your stores. Things like that your offices, you have recycling bins in your offices, but there is nothing to say that if you're producing 1 million pairs of chinos, in Bangladesh, that you are responsible for the waste that's coming from the back of that. So a big part of what we do is trying to focus on that, seeing how we can, in a sense, harvest that waste from the production point to ensure that it doesn't end up in landfill as it currently is doing.
So it sounds to me like there are, some initiatives that are trying to make process, but like you said, there's not a lot of accountability. So, we see lots of big fashion brands launching sustainable ranges, but I guess there's a question of how much that is greenwashing and how much of that is, a concerted effort to address, you know, the faults that they've made in the past and the impact they've had in the past. And I guess that's a real, you know, there's an opportunity for a turning point there of, you know, where do we go from here going forwards?
Absolutely. There's huge, you know, there are some great initiatives that are coming about from very well-known brands, but there are others that are, you know, at least from our point of view, looking to tick a box. And it's being careful not to fall into that trap, especially as a consumer, I think, you know, and hopefully the information that we provide with our products via the traceability we're giving and the transparency of, you know, this is exactly where your products come from, this is who made it, all of that kind of stuff can help inform consumers to make sure that they're backing the brands that are, you know, are in it for the long haul and that are in it for the right reasons.
Yeah, and you're really doing, you know, something that can make a difference to that going forward. James, I want to talk to you a little bit about trees, because I hear this is something you know a thing or two about. Something that we talk about a lot growing up, or certainly when I was at school, was being educated around the importance of trees and how they help the environment. But could you please give a little bit of a summary just to really emphasize how important they are, and I guess by proxy how important the work of the International Tree Foundation is?
Okay. I think so. Relating it again to COVID too, I think two things. One is COVID, as far as I understand it, may well have been caused by a virus moving from one creature to humans, a zoonotic, and that one of the risks with forest deforestation is that human populations more and more come in contact with different species populations who have viruses, who carry viruses and have learned to live with and adapted to living with that virus, that could turn out to be very dangerous for humans. So the likelihood of something like COVID happening again increases as we trash forests and expose us to animals and species who haven't been exposed to so far. I mean, trees, it's very difficult to know where to start in a way. I think one thing, again, COVID, a lot of people have talked about is how nature, being around trees, being around nature, seeing trees and having more time to actually kind of be with trees has made a big difference. And there's plenty of research, a growing body of research now into the calming effect, the way that the smell and the molecules that trees give off to control pests, but they can also in humans have a calming effect, and it can stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is all to do with
keeping you calm,
restful, keeping calm, and it can increase some bacteria in soil can increase serotonin levels, and even the patterns that leaves and you find all over nature, fractals, they have an effect, again, a calming effect. Because we evolved with trees, we evolved out of trees, and trees have always played a very important part in human life. So we do have a relationship, and to some extent, fundamentally, what International Tree Foundation is about trying to transform our relationship with nature, our relationship with trees, instead of it being an extractive one and a removed one. Somehow we're different and superior, and earth and nature is there for our purposes. It is actually we are part of, and if we're destroying nature, if we're destroying forests, then to some extent we're really destroying something that's very, very important about ourselves. But in a sort of more practical way, trees also serve very, very critical purposes for the landscapes in which we live. So they provide shelter from sun, they provide shelter from wind, and that can obviously make it easier for some plants and animals to live if the temperature is reduced and controlled by trees, but also prevents wind from blowing away soil, from preventing from soil degradation. And that means that affects farmers, so that affects the yield, that affects livelihoods in a very, very meaningful way. It also helps to nourish the soil and create space where a great deal of bacteria will grow, and thousands upon thousands of organisms, large and small, and the multitude of different processes around it can take place above the ground and below the ground.
And also, I guess it helps to offset the carbon as well, thus preventing climate change.
And it is one of the most effective forms of carbon sequestration, and they are for a very, very long period while they're growing. And sort of research comes out quite recently where mature trees, actually, not once they've reached their peak in growth, but mature trees do absorb a great deal of carbon, and forests then absorb even more carbon than the sort of sum total of those trees, which is why it's so important to preserve existing forests. But it's also
not just growing new ones as well.
Yeah,
because I know you've got a lot of projects that work to grow new ones.
Yes, but I think what I would say is that it's important not to think about trees as sort of carbon sequestering machines, and often it's sometimes put about in that way, and so we just must plant thousands upon thousands or millions of trees. We'll have a record-breaking. We'll plant 1 million trees in one day, kind of thing, which is great as long as you planted the right trees and they're a mix and not a crop at the right time, and someone's there to care for them. Because like this year, it was a very dry spring in the UK. A lot of trees would have died because no one was there to water them. But where it's communities involved, the community has been involved in choosing which trees and for what purposes, for the right reasons. It's their woodland, it's their landscapes, their homes, their livelihood. They're going to make sure the trees survive.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess also that's, again, coming back to the idea of community and being, I guess, getting the community involved in the solutions that are going to help things. And I guess also, especially in terms of the UK, a lot of the UK land is privately owned, and therefore, International Tree Foundation is working with smaller pockets of, common land that people have access to. And it can maybe perhaps feel, I wonder a little bit if people feel like they don't have, a responsibility to a certain place because they don't feel involved in their community. Francesca has an interesting question also for you. Do you want to jump in, Francesca?
Yeah, well, it's not really a question as much. It's just an angle that a lot of people don't think about when they think about the oceans and climate change, and because we know about trees, and like I definitely grew up being told that saving trees helps climate change and solves those issues, but something that a lot of people don't know about with like Save the Whales. I'm sure a lot of people have heard Save the Whales campaigns, but how whales are actually so important to carbon emissions and solving that crisis as well. So if I get these facts, I think I've got the facts right. There was a paper that was based on the sperm whale population in the Southern Ocean, so just one species of whale in one ocean. And the whale poop alone, because whale poop is very iron rich, which attracts and causes algal blooms. And algal is really, really important for absorbing the carbon emissions that we put into the atmosphere. And the whale poop from the sperm whale population alone is actually responsible for sequestering around a quarter to a third of the amount of carbon that the Amazon rainforest absorbs.
Can I just ask for a definition of sequestering, and then I know that Henry has something I'd like to add. But sequestering, for your person who doesn't know anything about how carbon works, could you just explain that?
Basically offsetting the carbon. So
okay.
Yeah, essentially.
The technical term for that. Henry, you had something you wanted to also add about this sequestering process.
Yeah, I mean, for me, sequestering, it means it's getting the problem, the climate crisis is principally caused by carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and sequestering is about taking that carbon and putting it somewhere else. So you might be putting it, on the seabed, you might be, growing trees out of it. Trees are basically made out of carbon. They do this amazing magic process, not magic, but they take carbon dioxide, the thing we need out of our atmosphere, and they turn it into oxygen for us to breathe and more tree. And that's just incredible. So that's why, these things are so vital for our climate. Why and actually one of the real dangers we have from things called tipping points, where we, as the planet warms, it actually is causing more forest fires and things, which are subsequently then causing, these things that are made out of carbon. We burn them, up goes the carbon into the atmosphere. So these processes work in both directions. It's why we have to be very, very careful of people talking about burning wood for fuel, for instance, and biofuels, because quite a lot of the time it's really a question of, what are we using can we use a piece of land actually? Can we use it to take carbon out of the atmosphere, or are we using it to put carbon up into the atmosphere? And various other things we do. So planting trees, one of the things it does is it sequesters carbon into that piece of land. it first grows trees out of it. Those trees eventually die off. They, the leaf rot down and all that sort of thing. That puts loads of carbon into the soil. But the important thing is it's no longer in the air. But other processes are doing the reverse. So, for instance, you put livestock on land and they produce a load of carbon. So we need to, one of the things that we're going to have to do, people talk a lot about getting to sort of net zero carbon emissions. And that means lots of different processes are going to have to change. We're going to have to burn a lot less of fossil fuels, obviously, in our transport to heat our homes and all these sorts of things. But to get the net zero means that actually some parts of what we're doing, we need to actually be putting into negative emissions. That means we need to be taking things that are currently, a field that's not doing anything particular, and we need to do stuff with it, probably plant a lot of trees on it that will be, taking carbon away, locking it up, sequestering it. So that's what that's all about. Friends of the Earth.
You and James. Double. Yeah, I was going to say you and James, the fans of trees in this. I just want to go to Adriana and talk a little bit about like the concept of offsetting. What is it, and sort of, obviously people need to be able to wear clothes. What are the decisions that both consumers can make, but also people within the industry can make in order to both acknowledge that people need clothes to wear, but also, I guess, make choices that are more positive for the environment?
Yeah, so I think this is a tricky one for us because it's almost where, being a business that is made on selling new clothes contradicts and conflicts with, our passion, which is to see the environment become more sustainable and business become more sustainable in itself. So ultimately, from our point of view, the absolute best thing you can do is keep wearing the clothes you already have. And if it is something that you have that you no longer want, then please just make sure it stays in circulation in one way or another. So what we actually partner with a brilliant local charity called Sharewear Clothing Scheme, which is here to fight clothing poverty in the UK, which in itself is a huge problem. So at Lyfcycle, we've committed to donate to them basically through garment development and making clothes. You end up with 1,000,001 samples, which are essentially brand new clothes that are never going to get worn. You might measure it once or twice, but then it gets kind of put in a box and stored away. So we've made a commitment to them to make sure that anything that isn't being used can get sent their way so that people in need can use it. And that's just one example of how we can offset, if we are going to buy something new, make sure that the old thing that it's replacing isn't just ending up in a rubbish dump somewhere.
I guess also lots of people donate their clothes to charity, which is good, but then the charities, lots of clothes still end up in landfill once they've gone to the charity shop.
Yeah,
There's not a lot of awareness around that.
There isn't, so that is another issue, and I think that's when textile recycling comes in its own, with a view to giving life or giving a new purpose to clothing that it either can't be worn again or has been left in the condition so that it won't be worn again. But from Lyfcycle, we look at, we're very optimistic. We're also realistic in that we know people will continue to buy clothes. So our vision is just to facilitate that in the best way we can to make that as sustainable as it possibly can be. So if you do have to buy a new pair of jeans, how can we reduce the environmental impact of that pair of jeans for the sake of everyone involved?
Yeah, I just want to sort of go through some of the questions we've had. This is one of the questions we've had is kind of around sort of tone and communicating, and I really like what you said there is about being optimistic but realistic. There's a question here: what communication strategies have the speakers found are successful in communicating about the climate emergency when most people and press are only focused on COVID, business as usual? And I guess also my question would also be, how do you get the tone right around these things that are, really serious, but you don't want to incite panic? Because sometimes panic, I feel like, can manifest in apathy, or sort of, well, this is going to happen, it's so big, it's so beyond me.
For me personally, if you don't mind me jumping in, I think it's about breaking it down into something that's understandable for people. So often we're doing exercises with brands where we are trying to put a number on the kind of carbon saving that one fabric might have versus another one, and even to them, we don't understand megajoules and kilojoules. But if you know that switching to one fabric is the equivalent of saving the same amount of energy as boiling your kettle 3 million times. You start to build, an understandable picture. So I think it's about breaking things down into kind of bite-sized chunks of information that can translate to somebody that's not an expert. And then the second thing I think is really important is, although people focusing so much on kind of COVID, particularly the press, any message kind of that can break through from under that has a positive note, I think, at the moment stands a really, really good chance. So Smiley is a perfect example of a brand that, is all about positivity and spreading good in the world. So even things like occasions like this event to talk, I think is the perfect way to sort of try and communicate about the climate change without scaremongering.
I guess also there's an element of, we see a lot of climate change now going on, and there's been feedback from this event already that the climate change doesn't exist, and I think it's about educating people that this is a real issue, and just because it's not necessarily in the press right now because of COVID, or there's lots of reasons why things don't necessarily end up in the press that they should, but it's about covering the important work. And part of what we do at Smiley Movement and Smiley News is cover the important work of charities and organizations who are trying to really tackle these issues. James, you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, we've been talking and struggling a lot about how do we relate what we do to climate change. Obviously, it is directly related, but we've always focused on the community bit, and we can talk about forest destruction, burning of gazillion rainforests and so on, but we really add very little. There are plenty of voices that do describe and raise the alarm. And what we don't want to do, we want to do quite the opposite, is to increase any sense of despair, because that's completely debilitating. And that's why we focus on the community involvement and community engagement, but also just the beauty and wonder of trees and of nature. And one thing we did when lockdown happened was to simply email out on social just to ask people, what is your favourite tree and why? And we got the biggest response, because it was an opportunity for people to talk about something that is really important to them, that they love. And
wasn't also COVID at the same time.
And it was COVID at the same time, yeah. And we found a big difference between people in the UK and people in the tree planters. And for lots of people in the UK, there's a big nostalgia childhood thing going on. Whereas for a lot of the people in the places where the tree planting programs are run, like Kenya or Mozambique, it's more lots to do with the well-being. And I think it's really important to be able to get people to be motivated to change something, to take action, to want to know more, that they feel their connection with nature, rather than just a terrible fear that it's all being taken away.
Yeah, you want to encourage a sense of curiosity and a sense of what can I do, not this is happening and I can't make a difference going forwards. Henry, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think we are actually facing this emergency, and it is very, very serious and scary, but it isn't too late to do something about it. My favorite quote is that to change everything, we need everyone. And I think that that's really where we're up to now, is that it's about all of us doing what we can, and actually realizing that there is a lot we can do. I've actually done some stuff in my own spare time. I managed to organize a group that got my council to pull all of its investments out of fossil fuels. It's just 6 of us sat around a table in Brixton, but we managed to get our council to set up a £200 million investment fund in a sustainable, fossil-free investments. And working at Friends of the Earth, I see hundreds of groups doing things like this. The groups that have defeated the fracking industry, the people who are fighting the third railway at Heathrow. And the thing that unites these people, they're all just ordinary members of the public. But when you get together with a group of friends, your neighbors, you actually have a great deal of power, much more actually than I might have as a sort of lobbyist working for a charity. Because why should your councillor or your MP listen to me? They should listen to you, because you elected them. And you can, when you get some people together and you learn a few facts and work with an organization like any of ours who can skill you up and teach you a few bits and pieces maybe, but really you'll be surprised how much you already know yourself and how much you know your area than any of us would. You can really make a difference to all this stuff, and it's essential that people around the world and people around the country do, because that's what we're going to need to get through this crisis.
I just wanted to jump in there. I don't know if any of you have heard of pajama activism, which is, it's a great phrase. It's essentially something that one of my friends came up with, where you basically have a slumber party, but you go and research things that are really important to you and that need kind of a social justice look at it, and you sign petitions and you write to your local government, and you kind of do it as a group. And it's, it takes a lot of the kind of fear of like doing it wrong or like having questions. And yeah, it's exactly what you were saying, Henry, making it something that people don't feel is really intimidating. It is just sitting around a table with 6 friends, or as James said, encouraging a sense of curiosity, pajamas, slumber party vibes or not. I was just going to say, what is one thing from each of you, if you could sum up one thing that you think everyone could do that would make a difference today? If anyone wants to go first.
I mean, I've got one that I think is really easy, and it's don't buy new clothes. If you don't need to buy anything new, don't buy anything new. And
for sure.
Yeah, it's just, I think that there's a statistic, like, I think the average item of clothing in our wardrobe only gets worn 7 times, which is, I think, a scary number. And the outlook, if we were even to just double that, for what that could do in terms of carbon emissions from the reduction then of in production of new clothes, is just massive. So for me, it's rewear, and if not, then please recycle it.
And I guess also in terms of, if there is a time you need to buy new clothes, how can people go about checking that the brand is sourcing its things sustainably and not just saying that they are? What would you recommend then, if people want to make a difference?
It's going to be different from brand to brand. So I think it's, if you are looking for that information, you should be able to find it primarily by looking at the websites that these brands have. Within the care labels of your garments, you should be able to find the information, but it is limited. So one of the best things you can do is work with brands that are renowned. Look at smaller brands that are renowned for coming from a place of environmental awareness when they're launching their products. And a Lyfcycle product, for example, the brands that we partner with will be able to show you exactly all of that information, where it's come from, where the fabric was from, which factory made it. So I think it's just, unfortunately, I don't think there's an easy answer in that there's a one-stop shop where you can go to know that your goods are all sustainably made and made with the environment in mind. So I think people do have to work at it a little bit. But I think it's just try to hold brands accountable, really.
I guess also there's a question there also about, if you've got the choice, if you don't have like money, or you've got you live somewhere where there aren't many shops you can go to, it's about placing the responsibility not onto the individual per se, but maybe encouraging the brands themselves to adopt more ethical practices, because not everyone has the choice to shop sustainably from ethical brands, especially right now when money's so tight, and people are used to not paying for.
So that's just one thing that I'd like to add, really, is that for us, one of the key issues that we're trying to battle when it comes to sustainable clothing is accessibility. At the moment, the majority of sustainably branded products, if they are truly sustainable, come at a premium, so they're not affordable and they're not readily available to the masses. So that's one thing that we're trying to combat, I suppose, to make it more accessible to more people.
Excellent. Francesca, do you want to tell me a little bit about your one thing that you would get people to do?
So I would say communicate. So talking about the climate crisis, even if you're just talking to your family or talking to that aunt that you have that doesn't believe in it and trying to change her opinion on it, making those changes. And with that is learning. So like changing your social media feed, for instance. Often your social media feed is an echo chamber of you and your friends. But if you actually change who you're following and follow, like, for instance, the charities that are on this, like the organizations that are on this panel event alone, but also following people, because generally charities and organisations doing this kind of work will have action points attached to their posts and things. So they'll post an environmental issue and they'll say about it, and you'll be like, oh, that's rubbish. And then at the end, there'll usually be like an action point of like, okay, this is a bad situation, but you can take action around this now. So being able to like basically learn more and then educate others and talk about it more is such an important part of tackling the climate crisis.
Yeah, and I guess the nice thing about that is it doesn't require you to necessarily have resources. You know, you just need a cup of tea and a cup of tea and a biscuit might help. But you know, it doesn't require much. Henry, would you like to give us your idea of your last thing?
Yeah, I mean, some great stuff already, actually. I mean, similar thing, really. I think it's get organized, get together with some other people and in your local area and start taking action. You can do that just with your friends. You don't need necessarily anyone else's help, but actually Friends of the Earth has got some resources we can offer. If you go to takeclimateaction.uk, you can find a list of like groups in your area or ways you can start your own from scratch if you want to, and we'd absolutely love to have everyone on board, because we just need, it can feel so daunting when you're particularly right now when we're all kind of a bit isolated more than usual, to be facing these problems kind of on your own, but you're really not on your own. I don't know how many people are watching this, but a lot, and you get together with some people, and very quickly, it's actually really good for you. It's really encouraging for your own well-being and your mental health and stuff to find that, there's a whole bunch of people who feel the same way. But very quickly, you'll find that you can really start making a positive difference when you start working together. So that would be my tip for everyone. For
sure. And also, I guess there's also an element there of, you obviously come from a lobbying background. I come from sort of a campaigning background, but you don't have to. It's not there's no prerequisites,
Well,
or those skills can help, but
I don't come from a lobbying background. I studied architecture, and I came quite late to this, in fact. And if anything, that's the thing. There's no particular mold or particular background you need to have had to get involved in this sort of thing, and I've seen people from all walks of life, from the children at school strikers to people in their 80s fighting against fracking rigs that someone wants to drill in their village. This is something that everybody can get involved with and everyone can help with. So you absolutely don't need to have gotten a degree in environmental science or anything like that. The most valuable thing you can give is your time and your energy, and everyone is welcome.
Yeah, it's something that it's like you said earlier, we need everyone involved. James, did you have something that people can do that you'd encourage people to do? One thing.
I've got three really quickly. One is sign up to our newsletter. The other is to spend time outside, spend more time, as much time as you can outside and with trees. And the third,
COVID-safe ways.
In COVID-safe ways, of course. And the third is probably it's very old, but I still think it might be the best, which is to be the change you want to see in the world. And I think that actually, when you start to think through that and what that means, it's really quite it can be really quite profound.
Yeah, for sure. Just looking at some of the questions we've had is really, really interesting. Particularly like the idea of like convincing people who don't think climate change exists. How do we go about dealing with that? Because surely we need, as Henry said, we need everyone on side and we need everyone doing their bit. How do we go about it? How do we go about changing things when some people just don't either agree that climate change exists or that it doesn't? It's not something that they can have an impact on.
I just think it depends how powerful that person is. If they're not very powerful, then perhaps the time would be better spent on trying to make a positive change in your life, and with those who are together can make more of a difference.
I guess also maybe it's a question of, I realise that I'm the host, but how, following on from that, how strong that belief is, maybe. If it's something that they've just picked up by osmosis as opposed to something they passionately believe.
For me, I found it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Francesca.
For me, I found that, like, I'm a scientist, so I found that using scientific journals which prove it, and if you go on Google Scholar, you can search for free topics around climate change or around anything really. But if you want to be talking about the climate crisis, and that will give you facts and figures that are literally undeniable. So for me, when I have those heated discussions, I like to have some scientific journals and some recent research, and you can filter Google Scholar on like years as well of research, so you can get the most recent research on it.
Yeah, and there's also lots of organizations as well that make that, you know, not everyone's got an academic background, but there are lots of organizations that make that data understandable and comprehensible, and something that everyone can access. Adriana, yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say.
I was going to be like, yes.
I was going to say, in the same way, so I'm by no means a scientist, but I know one thing that makes it really easy to sort of visualize and understand the impact of climate change is by watching TV. You know, you sit and watch David Attenborough, an hour with David Attenborough, and you're convinced that, you know, of the direction that things are going with the way that the world operates as it does currently. So I think that's I think David Attenborough himself has been a huge platform for raising awareness, perhaps amongst a generation or, you know, a group of people who wouldn't otherwise have had that at the top of your agenda. And there are so many other examples, I think, that now through things, you know, other online video streaming sites and stuff, where you can access information in a way that maybe doesn't seem so daunting and also doesn't seem so scary, but, you know, it plants that seed that I think starts to make people aware.
Yeah, for sure. And finally, because it's almost the end of our time, could you please tell me how we can where and how we can find you and how we can support your work? So starting with James, you mentioned earlier very quickly the newsletter and the actions people can take. Can you just repeat them again, slightly slower?
Yeah, sorry. We have a monthly newsletter, and we have a special competition going out in October to win some Greta Thunberg stuff. And so we will. That's a good place to find out what we're doing, how to get involved, what our projects and programs are achieving, and to find sort of slightly interesting and hopefully sometimes inspiring stuff about what people are doing in the world to tackle the climate crisis and to restore forests.
Really, really nice. So sign up to that, and there's a link that you can click right there if anyone would like to. Henry, what about you? How can we get involved with your week of action that's coming up?
Yeah, great. So thanks. The first thing I'd say is, go check out takeclimateaction.uk. That's where you can find out if there's groups near you or what's going on. We are having a week of action from starting the 5th of October. Has to be said, the plans have had to change for that quite a bit from what we were hoping to do because of COVID. So it's going to be largely online, but you can find out all the information from there. And Friends of the Earth, we have our website is friendsoftheearth.uk. We're all over Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and everywhere you'd expect. So yeah, check us out. You can always, we are a charity, you can always donate to Friends of the Earth. We're very grateful for that. But actually, people getting involved in their communities is the best thing you can really do. So, thanks.
Adriana, what about you? How can we get involved with Lyfcycle and to find out more about you?
Yeah, so the best way to find out more about us is either checking out our website, which is lyfcycle.co.uk, or if you're on Instagram, have a look at our profile, which is lyfcycle.co. That way you'll be able to see sort of the latest collaborations and which brands we're working with and what we're developing. We're not a charity ourselves, but we do work very closely, as I've already said, with Shareware. So if you can check out Shareware clothing scheme, see how you can get behind them. If you've got any unwanted clothes that need a new home, then that would be appreciated.
Yeah, if you're going through your wardrobes and realizing that, you know, you've got some things to, way too much stuff, and, you know, it's the change of seasons. Now's the time to do a declutter before the winter. Exactly. Perfect. And finally, Francesca, would you tell us how we can support Love Our Oceans right now?
So you can visit our website, lovetheoceans.org, and you can donate on the website too. We are actually running a fundraiser at the moment to tackle the illegal poaching in the area and allow people to still eat, but sustainably and legally. That's working with our partners Evercare and Paddle Yak Kayaks. But please visit that fundraiser. It's a Just Giving fundraiser. You can just Google Just Giving fundraiser, Love the Oceans, Sustainable Fishing Project. We're trying to raise as much money as possible to be able to buy the initial kayaks for that project. So please do visit that.
Excellent. Thank you so much to all of you for joining me today and to have this discussion. I hope it's been as enjoyable for you as it has been for me. And I know that lots and lots of people have been involved. For anyone wanting to find out more about what Smiley Movement do, you can head to smileymovement.org. We run news articles and we run events, and we're looking to run more events soon. So we'd love to hear what you'd be looking for and what you'd like to hear about as part of these events, which will be online for the foreseeable due to COVID. Thank you so much for getting involved. If you've enjoyed this and would like to find out more about any of the charities, there are links in the comments of the streams, and there will also be the details on our websites where you can find out more about the charities and organisations we've spoken to today. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll speak to you soon. Bye.